guys, so today I will be showing you how I do dressage braids for shows and clinics, because with show season approaching, I thought it would be a fun video, and to the 19 people who requested it on Instagram, here it is. So when I braid, normally I use quick braid, but you can also just use water, which I found works just as well. Like my last show, I forgot my quick braid at home, so I literally just dipped my hand in my water bucket and used that. And then I have this little braiding belt, and I bought it from Green Hawk for like not even $20, and it comes with clips, a little comb, another comb, a plastic needle. I believe it comes with a rug hook and also a thread ripper. I think that's what it's called. I took sewing, you would never be able to tell. I don't remember anything. And then these ones come with these big kind of plastic needles, but I went on Amazon and I bought, I think it was a dozen of these metal embroidery needles, I think, and they're kind of dull at the end, and I just find these are a lot more sturdy and they help me make the stitches in the braid a lot better and a lot tighter. You will also need elastics to match your horse's mane color, and because my horse is a bright red chestnut, there's not really anything that matches too well, so I just use brown. A lot of people like using yarn to make their braids fluffier, but I like the waxed thread a little bit better because I find it holds the braid in, and also I find it easier to sew in, and it's not as noticeable, especially because my horse's mane is lighter than the thread. Then I find you don't notice it quite as much. And then finally, you're gonna need a pair of trusty scissors because you're braiding, you're gonna need scissors. So when it comes to mane length for braiding, I like to do about a hand's length down. Mine is a little bit shorter because her mane is a little bit thicker. So if her mane's really thick, it's gonna be hard for me to roll up the braids if her mane is longer. And also her mane is a little bit thinner down here. So I don't want it too short because then these braids aren't gonna look full enough. So in ballerine, I do 7 braids normally, just because that's what I think looks nice on her. It adds a little bit of roundness to her neck here because the middle part of her mane is thicker than the rest of it. And I used to do 9, but then I got lazy, so I only do 7. So with your horse, you really want to look at the shape of their neck and what's going to look, well, what's going to look good on them. So if your horse has a thinner neck, I wouldn't do big braids because they're going to look a little bit out of place. I would do smaller ones, and if you can, leave the mane a little bit longer so that they look thicker, and that'll add a little bit more volume to the neck instead of these big ones. And although the big ones do add a nice curve, if your horse's neck is really thin, the braids are going to look like the width of the neck, which isn't exactly ideal. So the first thing you want to do is make sure your horse's mane is well brushed out and free of tangles. And something really important is to not put any detangler or conditioner in it for probably about a week leading up to when you want to braid, because otherwise your braids are going to fall out, you're going to have trouble braiding, and the mane will just be really slippery. So once your mane is all detangled and ready to go, you're going to normally divide your mane into the sections you want and tie them off with elastics. But because I've braided ballerine so many times, I just kind of do it from memory and just start braiding from the top. But this will help you, just give you a guide if you're new to braiding. So for example, down here, her mane is quite a bit thinner than the rest of it. So I would do these 2 braids a little bit more narrow, just so that when I roll them up, they don't look so sparse. I'm going to section off just a couple pieces of her mane for you guys to see, and I'll braid kind of this middle bit here and get these 2 out of the way. So when I braid her, I do a little wider than a hand's width for each braid. And what I'm going to do next is take my metal comb, and I'm going to go right down where I want to part the braid and make sure it's a nice straight line. Just like that, and that's about the size of braid I start with for her. So it's quite a bit wider than I would do down at the other end where her mane is thinner. So that's about the size I want, so I'm going to clip this to the side for now and get it out of the way. And I'll section off the next one about this wide and make sure the part is nice and straight. There we go, that looks good. And same thing on this side, I'm just going to clip away the pieces of mane I don't want. So we have moved down to my coach's end because we are also babysitting now. So I have a little bucket of water and I'm just going to wet her mane a little bit. And normally I use quick braid, but water sometimes works just as well. And I'm just going to section off her mane into 3 equal parts. Braid down, and the first kind of couple of times you cross the mane over, you don't want to do it really tight, but you don't want to leave it really loose. Some people say to leave it really loose, but I find that when you like roll it up, it fluffs up way too much. So I kind of leave it in between, and now I braid tightly all the way down. And her mane is kind of uneven, so I'm not going to be able to braid all the way, but as far as I can. This is why the water, the quick braid is nice. And then I'm taking an elastic and just tying it off. Now, why is your head so high? And then on the last kind of loop, I don't pull the tail through quite all the way, so it just hides it a little bit better underneath. I have my needle threaded with my last thread. I normally cut not quite an arm's length, and I usually cut them all beforehand, and I put them through this little thingy on my braiding belt along with my quick braid. There are two different ways you can roll up your braid. You can either fold it in once and then again, which works quite well for her length of mane, or she's being very friendly right now, or you can kind of just roll it up as you go. So I'm going to roll her braid under, because this is just the method I prefer, and then I'm going to take my needle and go straight through and out the back and pull it so I leave a couple inches, and then just go back through and pull tight. And now this is when you can kind of shape the braid to how you want. So you want to make sure you don't have any bits hanging out and that it's all nice and tight. So you can kind of feel with your needle too how much mane you're sewing through at one point. So right here I'm going through, I think, what's the whole braid. And you don't want to pull it so tight that you're going to kind of smush the braid flat. And usually I just do a couple of stitches. It depends on each braid. Some I do more, some I do less. Whatever you think is comfortable. And now with the last one, I'm going to try and come through close to where this tail is right here. Just like this. And then I'm taking my needle off, sticking it back in my belt. And this step is totally optional. This is just what I do because it just gives me a little bit more peace of mind. So I just take the tails here and I just tie a little knot, just because then I know for sure it's going to stay in, excuse me, and that there's no chance of it coming out. If the braid is sound, you shouldn't have to worry about this anyway, but I just think it hides it too a little bit better because the thread is so much darker than her mane. Now my final step is I'm just going to snip off these little tails here, kind of smush them in. And that is how I do a dressage braid. Alright, and I braid my forelock a little bit differently than most people. I don't do a French braid. I do something else. And I can't take credit for this trick. I learned it from a girl that I used to ride with. And I find it doesn't pull out as much of their forelock, and it's a lot easier than a French braid. So I use white elastics because I think they look a little bit nicer than the brown ones, and I just add a little bit of pizzazz. Okay, so I'm going to take a little section of her forelock right at the top here, and I'm just going to take my white elastic and tie a little ponytail, trying to make sure it's centered. Just like that. So we have a nice little unicorn horn. I'm taking a little bit more of her forelock here, and I'm going to go about 1 inch down from the last ponytail and tie a second one. Just like this. Stop it. Just like that. I'm taking a little bit of water. I don't use a lot on her forelock, but just a little bit to smooth it down. And I'm just going to braid all the way down and tie it with a brown elastic. And with the forelock braid, with this version, I suppose, that I'm doing, I braid quite tight starting at the top. And her forelock gets quite thin at the bottom, so I'm not going to go much further down. And I'm taking a brown elastic and just going to tie it off just like I did the braid on her mane, and just pull the tail through halfway at the end. So to finish this braid off, I'm going to tuck the bottom part kind of underneath and just roll the braid up. Just like this. And then I take a white elastic just tie it up. And then usually I do a second white elastic on top just to make sure that it stays in, and in case the first elastic breaks. Just like this. And then there we go. We have our little forelock braid. So this is how I braid Miss Ballerine for dressage shows and clinics. She was good, a not so willing model, but that's okay. I rode her today, so I think she's a little bit antsy and wants to go eat her supper. So if you guys have any questions, please leave them below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!